Thank you very much. Welcome to you all to this Southeast LEP conference. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for being here. So this afternoon, we're going to look back at the achievements of SELEP and share some of the lessons we've learnt, and most importantly, consider the ever-evolving landscape of the local economic policy, and of course, discuss the integral role of public-private partnership and how it fosters good, sustainable growth. So for over a decade, SELEP has been at the forefront of working to drive economic prosperity across our region. Through our partnership, I believe we have made a real difference to the socio-economic fabric of the Southeast. From infrastructure enhancements to investments in education and skills, from tourism to culture, from housing to rail, we've worked to stimulate good growth and enrich the lives of our communities. Truth is, it hasn't always been easy. Like the rest of the country, we have faced significant challenges, including, of course, the devastating impact of COVID and the changes that Brexit has brought about. But the partnership has demonstrated real resilience and adaptability. We've worked to ensure that our response was swift and tailored to the needs of our businesses and our communities. And the agility with which we've navigated through turbulent times is a testament to the directors, to the Secretariat, to the local authorities and our many stakeholders. Partnership, as you all know, doesn't happen by magic. It takes time, it takes focus, it takes flexibility, leadership and collaboration. I have been really, truly honoured to witness the unwavering support of both public and private partners. Together, we've championed initiatives that have propelled our region forward, leveraging the expertise, the knowledge and the resources of diverse stakeholders to drive meaningful change. The time and the commitment given by our partners and by the staff shouldn't be underestimated, and I'd like to thank them from the bottom of my heart. We have thrived over shared goals, evidence-led strategy, and a spirit of mutual respect. So today we have a chance to delve into the crucial topics that will shape the future of the trajectory of the economic growth of the Southeast. We will hear discussions about effective private sector engagement, envisioning and setting the direction for the future landscape of our region's economy, and consider how the delivery of projects and schemes can make the most of the investments that we will see in the future. Each panel discussion promises to offer valuable insights and perspectives. I'm excited for us all to hear that. So as we prepare to transition the functions of our LEP to the local authority partners, we do so with confidence, knowing that the legacy of the Southeast LEP will endure. Our investments in infrastructure, our investment in skills and business support will continue to bear fruit, laying the groundwork for sustained prosperity for generations to come. As I said, I'd like to thank you all for being here today, and of course to Jonathan for chairing the discussions. I'd also like to thank all of our expert panels. Your vision, your thoughts and ideas are crucial to developing the direction for the future. May the efforts of the past pave a way for the future, a future where the Southeast thrives as a beacon of opportunity, as a beacon of collaboration, as a beacon of innovation and inclusivity, and of course, of economic vitality. Thank you.
Many thanks, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. My name's Jonathan Werran. I'm the Chief Executive of Localis, the independent think tank of Place, and this is my great good fortune and pleasure to be moderating 3 panels looking in the 3 strategic pillars here: the voice of business, strategic direction and delivery. We Has any comment been made about the location here? We're in here, the Royal College of Pathology, but we're here not just to dissect what's gone on in the past, while the body is still semi-cold, but to look at the present and the future. So the agreement is we've got many speakers, many voices, but we also have a voice for the audience too. So do you all know how to use the Slido for today's session? Failing that, I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way, put up my head, you put your hand up and tell me who you are and where you come from and give me a question, not a comment, and we'll let you in that way. So a lot to take in on those main issues. I'm really going to in order to keep, so the main thing is, so we've got many speakers. Let's all try and keep to time, speakers included. So I think you all saw in the briefing instructions, 2 to 3 minutes. Please keep it, no, less is more, so we can have a bigger debate. And otherwise, we won't be able to finish at 3 for Sarah to take us out for a drink, a nice East End boozer, as has been promised. So if we're all in agreement, we're going to have an open, lively debate and exchange with 3 panel sessions looking at the voice of business, strategic direction and delivery in that order. And we're going to do it well and enjoy it. Are you all with me? Yeah. Thank you very much. So without any further ado, can I kindly invite my first panellist? The first panel is to discuss and assess what's been the foundation for successful private sector engagement in the work of the LEP, and how can the business voice be effectively represented in our future arrangements to support growth and investment across the South East. So Sarah, you stay put. I'm going to invite Liz Gibney from Lee Evans Partnership, Hannah Kitcherside from Lower Thames Crossing, Councillor Roger Goff, leader of Kent County Council, and Councillor Keith Glazier from East Sussex County Council. Please assume your seats and we shall get the show on the road. Thank you. Good. So we all sit. We know happy enough what the theme is. Can I ask? But let's take it easy. Starting to my right, Keith. If you could get us off to a start, please.
Certainly. From my perspective, the best thing that has happened to the LEP was the federated model that we eventually came up with, which, from East Sussex perspective, gave us the momentum to set up an economic development board, which is called Team East Sussex, which incorporates all the businesses, the skills, the boroughs and districts, and we have a partnership there that actually gives us the confidence collectively that what we're discussing is important to all of us. And so the legacy from the LEP will be that Team East Sussex will exist and will flourish. And under a good chairmanship, we will be taking forward another economic strategy, which will clearly set the tone for what we want to deliver. So, what's the key point for me? Without that intervention, I don't believe we would be as far advanced as we are now. And so, working across sector through the LEP has given us that head start.
Many thanks indeed, Keith.
I think from our perspective on Lower Thames Crossing, the access that we've had to the business voice and how we've actually enabled the business voice to shape what we're doing has been really, really important. So, we've had an understanding and advice from the board around how we can make the most of the connectivity that we're creating. The connectivity between Kent and Essex actually benefits everyone within the LEP, which is great. We need to make sure that we're making the most of that. So also, how do we access to the supply chain? How do we make sure that we have a simple engagement with them, that they can be part of the construction of Lower Thames Crossing and also the legacy? There's a big piece we're looking at around skills, education. So how do we make sure that we're building skills for the future and not for now, as well as part of that? And also just access to and support from the Major Projects Working Group, the SELEP Housing Developers Group and the Working Skills Group is all part of those discussions, which has been really helpful for us. And as you might know, we're kind of in the DCO and the examination phase of that development consent order. Having the support from members across the local enterprise partnership is what it means for them, the opportunities that you have that Lower Thames Crossing will create has been great. It's been great to have that support going into the examination period, and also the actual letter of support that went to the Secretary of State as well.
Many thanks indeed, Hannah. Roger, please, your views.
Yes, and I think what I have to say fits with what's been said already. Going back to Keith's point about the federated model, again, that's been very much our experience in Kent and Medway, the Kent and Medway Economic Partnership, and that again becomes the vehicle by which we then move forward after these changes are completed. One thing which and I think throughout that business voice has been strong. One of our colleagues had the phrase Team Kent, and that captures, I think, a great deal of what's happened, both within Kent and Medway Economic Partnership, and also through the use that we've made of vehicles such as the Business Advisory Board, which again has been quite central in terms of engaging on some of the really big issues we've faced, such as, for example, the need to try and secure or reopen the Eurostar facilities at Ashford and Ebbsfleet, and indeed across a whole range of other issues as well. So I think that's put us in good stead. And I would hope, actually, as we move forward into the new arrangements, that the difference is more apparent than real. There has been a strong business voice. There needs to be a strong business voice. And we get the right division of labour between business and local authorities.
Many thanks, Roger. Quick swerve, Sarah, if you could go for Liz, thank you.
Obviously, I'm biased. I'm chair of the LEP. We're going to talk about the foundation of success. But I think, clarity of purpose has always been really important to us, and the ability to have that kind of diversity of voice across both public and private is very important, and the ability to deal with at a large scale with people like the Lower Thames Crossing, and think strategically on all of those is really important. I think it's really important that in the future there is no duplication, and that we can all continue to work at real pace.
Many thanks, Ian. Finally, Liz, if I could ask you.
Thanks. I'm sitting between Roger and Sarah, which is really good. I'm the chair of the Business Advisory Board that Roger mentioned, and also the Kent Medway Economic Partnership. And I'm in the lucky position of being able to learn from all the things that we've learned from the LEP, and then to move forward linking the Kent and Medway economic framework into our work going forward, and then to think about the significance of what we can deliver through infrastructure works. We've also in the past looked at problems such as Operation Brock. So we have a series of priority areas going forwards which are linked to the strategic plans for both Kent and for Medway. And then what we will do is we prioritise according to the changing circumstances, but also based on the lessons that we've learned. And we had a very, very interesting board meeting this morning with some incredibly inspiring summaries from people at the end of what has been, some incredible progress by the South East LEP. And I think I feel quite inspired to take that forward. When we heard about the amount of delivery of projects that have been done, and they're at granular level to absolutely really significant strategic, and I think that's what we collectively think is the way forward, is to try to understand the importance of making that span from the very granular to the really regionally significant.
Many thanks, Liz, and many thanks to our panel for some very punchy, pithy points that are raised. Now, over to you lot. No one's put anything on Slido yet, but I can't imagine there are too many shrinking violets from our friends here. Please, I'll stand up. Let's take some questions about what the role of the business voice has been, what it is, and what it potentially could be under future arrangements. Let's have some hands. Brian, my hero.
Brian Horton, I'm, as we sit here, the strategic housing advisor to SELEP. Prior to that, as you know, I was had a similar role with Kent, and I've seen the transition. Oh, thank you. So Brian Horton. So I've seen the transition over a decade or more, from the old arrangements to this new world, the federated arrangements, and the impact that SELEP being in many ways greater than the sum of the parts. And I suppose I'm interested, as well as the power and influence that can be exerted at an individual county level, is how what the appetite is to still join arms across those partners that you've been working with over the last decade to just amplify those shared points that have been so successfully brought forward over the last 10 years as we go forward in the new arrangements.
Many thanks, Brian. Anyone want to respond to Brian's? Liz?
One of the things that I've worked with Brian on actually, is a coastal communities group.
Mm-hmm.
And very, very, very interesting, because there are similarities in certain areas which are not geographically close, but you can see similarities. We've had very good engagement with some of the local MPs as part of that as well. You learn so much from looking beyond your geographical area, in terms of things that have worked well, things that haven't worked well, and I think that is an example which can be applied to other sectors as well. But I really think that's something that has been really successful and that we should continue to work on in that way.
Thanks, Liz. I'll take Roger, Sarah, then Keith.
Thank you. Yes, I think firstly there are, as Liz mentions, there are areas of commonality, and certainly if you take coastal towns, that applies to all the, certainly if you think of the three major sort of functional economic areas of the LEP. There's also some mechanisms will continue. There are a handful of areas where the work will continue, but also some of us will find areas in which we have other reason to work together closely. So certainly between Kent and Essex, for example, there's our shared role within the Thames Estuary Growth Board, and I think there are a whole range of these areas where we will find that the links we have built over these this last decade and a little bit more can be continued. But equally, to come back to where we started, we've got to ensure that we do that. We have the business voice as an absolutely critical part of it, because there are areas where pure local authority cooperation is really important, but actually that can't be the sum total of it.
Many thanks, Roger. Sarah, please.
So as Roger alluded to, some areas of work will continue, and Kent County Council has agreed to continue the work of the South East Creative Economy Network. And I have to confess, I work in the creative sector, and I'm co-chair of that group as well. And I guess for businesses that work in the creative sector, we don't sit in one geographic area. We're not sitting there going, well, I'm working in Kent at the moment, I'm only going to think about Kent. So absolutely, what we do across the region will have real importance. And we need to think about, the logistics sometimes of how you might get some of the film stuff, for example, to happen in an area. All of those things are going to remain really important. And what became really clear through CCEN was that actually there was a real desire by all those creative sectors to continue to work together, and that we believed we could make a bigger impact for our sector by working together. So that absolutely will continue.
Many thanks. Keith, please.
I think the other learning for all of us was that we followed the SELEP structure, and we've set up now subgroups of Team East Sussex, which cover business, skills, culture, development and environment. And every one of those has key business representation. So we're actually widening and opening up the ability for business to influence what goes on across an area. And I think that that's so vital that for so long we would always think that in local government that we knew where we were going, but now we're actually taking the voice of the people that make the difference.
Hannah, please.
And just to add to what's been said, really, there's a lot around the legacy that this has already created, and I guess moving to the new model and the change it's creating, it still has that legacy to go forward. So we have those connections that we've had in place. We've got the voice of businesses. We'll continue to use those voices and those networks that we have. And hopefully we'll be able to amplify those through the work at Lower Thames Crossing as well, because we know that we're creating those networks that will form part of the supply chain, for example, or form part of our future skills. So I think that's really important to recognise, and hopefully there's strength in those relationships that have been built.
Many thanks indeed. Next question. The technology ain't working. So we'll look on the phone. Okay, we've got one. How can the business voice continue to be included in future investment decisions? Investment is the kind of name of the game for anyone who read all 9,000 words of Rachel Reeves' May's lecture this week. Future investment, how's the voice of business going to be included in that? Across the panel, anyone take it, please.
If I start,
Go on, Keith.
well, where I finished off, at the end of the day, I think that now the inclusion of the business voice, and for Team East Sussex being led and chaired by business, I would hope that businesses would feel that they can absolutely depend on that structure to enable them to come through. Of course, we now have to worry about where the investment's going to come from, not how we're going to spend it, but that's another story.
Thank you. Sarah, then Roger.
I think what you've heard already from our local authority leaders is there is a commitment from them through their federated board structure already, and I think hopefully what they've seen through SELEP is a worth in that business voice and that it adds value. And so I hope that the past will absolutely demonstrate what can be possible in the future. So I think the structure's already there to a certain extent within the federated board structure, and I hope it will very much continue.
Many thanks, Roger.
Yeah, I don't think there's any problem with the engagement or the willingness, certainly, and commitment to engagement of business in this. I think if there is a challenge, it's a slightly different one, which I think you touched on, which is what's the investment that's actually going to be coming? Because and what is the engagement if those streams are a lot less? So one of the key things with the LEPs, with this LEP and with LEPs generally through their history, has been a number of those key funding streams, like Local Growth Fund, Getting Building Fund. And it's worth saying on that, incidentally, that was a great example, certainly from our experience in Kent, of that Team Kent process coming together, because we had some utterly ridiculous deadline in terms of pitching to it. And the challenge of getting a coherent view across Kent and Medway as to what the priorities were that we could successfully bid into government for. And through that engagement, through the different parts of local government and with business and with key partners such as the universities, we got there. So now that was, I think, in many ways, a very encouraging bit of process. The challenge will be also to ensure that when we try and shape policy, shape developments in areas like skills and so on, that there is that same level of two-way street, because that's really important too. But it's perhaps less immediately exciting than if there's real money on the table, and there may, for a while, possibly be a bit less of that.
Many thanks. Well, good news, folks, the tablet is working. Got more questions than we possibly have answers for, but a corollary to that, great question. How does the panel envisage regional infrastructure projects being undertaken under the new arrangements? How's there, any thoughts or views about what the future might be in terms of the deliverology of that? Liz?
I think something that's interesting about that is, and it goes back to Roger's previous point about where money's coming from and how money is spent, is the key to successful investment is it isn't just money, and it's linking together various pots of money using infrastructure and strategic vision to actually bring about real change. So because there are certain areas where you could invest lots and lots of bits of money, but it wouldn't actually bring about real change. And I think understanding infrastructure, understanding how strategic growth can link with that, and then plugging that into key projects when they come through, I think that's what will be successful, because then you get things like regeneration rather than just investment. And I think if we can work going forwards in understanding that and linking with really key infrastructure projects, but not just letting them sit by themselves, then I think, you know, the real appetite for change will still be there.
Hannah?
Completely agree. And I think from our part, it's about providing everyone with that transparency about how we're going to unlock those opportunities and what those regional infrastructure projects could be. You know, there's a lot of opportunity to come out of further connectivity, whether that's by road or access to rail. And also, let's not forget the housing developments that come out of increasing that connectivity. and a lot of that being things such as affordable housing and allowing you to actually create that stock. So I think transparency on our part in when that's coming, how you can engage with it, how you can influence it is really, really important. And then also just the piece about investment in regional infrastructure is looking very different now. We're talking about, and in one of your strategic areas is green, sort of clean growth, hydrogen, and how that's going to be used in the future is one of those areas. So it's thinking, what is regional infrastructure going to look like in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, that we're preparing for it now, and also supporting you in those discussions.
Many thanks, Anna. Keith,
Well, I'm going to diversify slightly with put my other hat on as chairman of Transport for the South East. And the 7 subnational transport bodies now around the country are actually coordinating and bringing together an awful lot of evidence around infrastructure needs, and then working with local transport authorities to enable bids for that to go in. And for the first time, I think, certainly in my time as a elected member, we actually now have transport, national highways and national railways on our board, and we're actually having early interventions into those areas, along with working with the different departments. Is that going to be the delivery route? I doubt. Is that going to be the catalyst that enables all the evidence to be gathered? Yes, I think it will be.
many thanks. Any more from the panel on that, Roger?
Endorse what's been said. I think just a couple of thoughts. One is, of course, it depends what you mean by the region, because that will vary. So if we think transport for the southeast on the one side, which is covering one area, and then if we're engaging on Lower Thames Crossing, then that draws in, So we've got to ensure, but I do think actually generating that coherent area-wide view and it then being a two-way street between that and government is absolutely critical. And that's, we start with the work we've been doing on the Kent Medway Economic Framework that is designed, I think, to again help to ensure that you then actually get a coherent approach to when all those opportunities, when they do arise, that they can be responded to properly at that regional level.
Sarah, please.
And just to build on that, which is, we've developed a situation of mutual trust and respect, and a way of working through the LEP. Now, the LEP structure itself may have discontinued, but actually, that you can't take away the fact that we've worked together before, that we have that respect, that we have that knowledge of each other. So that hopefully will continue.
Many thanks indeed. Many thanks, David Taylor, for asking a killer question. Which I'm going to go to you first, Roger. You've been sort of barely out of the news this week, the Times and the Broad, another with your CCN hat on. It's David asked, look, given the challenging financial state of local authorities, how can we be sure that the federated model of business support will work? So it's an important thing, with that, the viability of a local foundational state. How's any of this going to stick?
Well, I think the question is a very fair one, though whether it particularly challenges the federated model rather than any other, I'm less sure, because I think the great challenge for local authorities, to pick up exactly the point that you've mentioned, some of the work that we publicised earlier in the week through the County Councils Network, is that we have been, we are all of us upper tier authorities under this relentless pressure through, what we call people services. So that is basically adult social care, children's services, certain areas of particularly school transport. In Kent, let me just give you an example. We spend now £70 million on SEN home to school transport. So those pressures are enormous, and it does mean that for all authorities, the challenge to find the headspace, the capacity, and the money to deliver this is really, really intense. Now, I do think some of the elements of what we've already discussed, the regional work together, is an important part of dealing with it. I think that one of the attractions, to my mind, always of the government's wider devolution agenda was that you can actually create some structures which are slightly at arm's length from the bits that are putting those really intense pressures on local authorities. So if you can have a bit of a structure there, whether it's a combined authority or whatever it is, that is not trying to keep the lights on in relation to those intense pressures, but can focus on the big strategic issues, that may be a way through it as well. So it's those sort of structures which I think are going to be really critical, because otherwise local authorities, as presently structured and financed, do face a real problem.
Many thanks, Roger. Any more across the panel? Okay, let's move. We're not short of questions. Very obvious one. How is, given the community and its business has generally got to know and understand the LEP model, how will the new federation get the new model promoted? So what's going to be the next steps in getting business voice amplified, articulated? Liz, thank you.
I think we have the advantage of having had our federated boards that have existed for quite a long time. That said, what we haven't done is we haven't just let them carry on as they were before, because they do need to evolve, and that's the stage that we're at. We've done a lot of work in moving towards a new model, and the fact that we have the business advisory board, which sits below the federated board, is very helpful, because it's very large, and that reaches out to a very large geographical area. It tries to be as diverse as possible. It goes across all sectors in order to get the voice to be heard as much as possible, and that's what we're going to carry on doing, I think.
Thank you. Keith?
Well, I've said it once, I'll say it again, because I actually think it's a key goal or takeaway from the LEP Federation, is that actually Team East Sussex is the body to go to, has been the body to go to for 10 years. And it doesn't matter what pressure local government are under. I don't think there's anyone in the room, well, there might be, I'll be careful, who doesn't believe that working together and bringing our powers together, we are much more likely to get things delivered. So it is worth the investment, and without that, I think we'll all be in trouble.
Many thanks.
And I was just going to, if I think about Southeast Creative Economy Network, which is going to continue, that operates on a, open door policy, in that anyone who works in the creative sector can join those meetings. They are, they're published on the websites, and that will continue. So I think it's, and what happens through that is we kind of quite often have a series of what I call task and finish groups, where you're looking at particular areas, particular agendas that you want to address, and then you do have a quick sprint at those areas, then look at, and then come back and go, okay, that worked, that didn't work, or there's this other area we need to look at. All of these partnerships are only as good as the people on them, and so I think that's important, that you continue that open door policy as much as possible, that you continue to be transparent about what you're doing, and that you welcome people to all of those meetings.
Many thanks indeed. I'm going to combine a couple of questions on a similar theme here. So one question, is there a risk going forwards that councillors will only listen to voices they deem important, not a range of voices? How important is it for different economic sectors to be represented and supported through the new arrangements? So how do we maintain diversity and keep it an open shop as opposed to a closed shop when it comes to making successful representations? Keith?
I don't think anyone should go away from here believing that the federated boards are the answer to everything, even though I think that, from my perspective, they are a great improvement. But they are just another tool in the box. At the end of the day, businesses have their own ways of communicating. Businesses work well outside of local government, and hopefully having business inside the Team East Sussex, in our case, it gives us that added flavour and ability to react. Are we going to get everybody's voice in? Are we going to actually be able to deliver on everybody's pet topic? No, we're not. Should we still continue to work together? Yes, we should. I think life will go on post LEP, but outside of our federated boards. And we should just be tapping into them. They shouldn't always have to be tapping into us. there's a lot of energy and experience out there.
Lovely. Roger, you wanted to come in next.
Yeah, I mean, partly it comes back to what we were discussing earlier on. So, talking about for instance, the size and diversity, as you were, Liz, of the Business Advisory Board. It's what, 40 members or so?
Maybe
Yeah.
more, I think.
Yeah, something of that order. And so it is important to have that variety of voices, but also to be able to reach out. And I mentioned the work on Eurostar. You mentioned some of the work around Operation Brock, and in both cases ensuring that actually Business Advisory Board acted as a quite central body to ensuring that wide range of voices was heard. Otherwise, there is a responsibility, and it's a challenge because across the country as a whole, and certainly in Kent, it's even more so. Most businesses are very small, and the question of who speaks for all those, that vast array of businesses is quite a difficult one to get right. But I do think there's a responsibility on us to do that, and also I think to be honest about what our economies actually are. I think there's always been a tendency. I've observed this over the years. Hopefully, we're getting better at it, but if you ever looked at an economic strategy years ago, it was the same sectors everybody wanted to be strong in, the same ones that were fashionable. And you thought, well, not everybody's going to make it in that, and sometimes you've got to be very, very clear about what your economy actually is. And even if you wish to see it change, you have to see it change in a way that is realistic and that builds on what you have. So again, I think that's a discipline which anybody who's engaged in strategic leadership, and I can think of no better way of disciplining that than having that strong voice through bodies, in our case, like the Business Voice on KMEP, like BAB, but ensuring that it's not just a select few.
Liz.
Just a very quick thing to add to that, that I think the key to the success of it is the extent to which we could have a shared vision, and one that can transcend size and regions and all that sort of thing. And I think that's what has worked really well with the LEP, and that's what it's this speaking with a coherent voice, which is hard, but actually if you know your place and you know at a very high level what direction you're trying to head in, it's something that you can then apply and people can relate to it at lots of different levels.
Many thanks. Any more? Hannah, please.
Inclusivity of voice is really important when we're looking at a major infrastructure project of the size and scale that we are, trying to deliver. And I think for us, having the networks that we have created within the businesses to still be able to talk to, the communities that we go out and speak to as part of consultation process, which will be ongoing, will still form part of how we're taking the scheme forward. Otherwise, we can't leave a legacy that's relevant to the communities that we're impacting upon, and the opportunities that we're opening up for them. So I think no matter what we do, and from an infrastructure scheme perspective, we can't do it without inclusivity of voice, and that does mean listening to everyone. And business voices as part of that also enable us to think about how we're innovating, because we need to do things differently as well. We get that innovation not only from our kind of big delivery partners on board, but actually from the small businesses that want to do something differently that we're willing to take a risk on. And we'd love to hear from businesses that have those ideas, and so that's what the LEP will continue to provide for us.
Many thanks, Ivana. The sands of time are running low on this one, but I've got two quick ones, quick responses from the panel before we move on to number two, the second one. A question here about SMEs. They can find it harder to inform and engage. How can FEAs better hear and enable this voice in a more localised model? And what does the panel think about the role of developing a workforce to support regional growth, given the rise of economically inactive individuals? So SMEs and boosting the workforce. Any quick questions? So take it, Sarah, take it along. Thank you.
So I'll start on the SME issue. I mean, obviously, I think it's as kind of what we've all been saying, which is about the clarity of purpose, the clarity of vision, and then ensuring that there are multiple entry points, really, and actually being clear, if you're an SME or a micro business, you don't have the time to give to lots and lots of meetings, nor may you not want to. So actually just finding areas that you feel as an SME or a micro business that you can engage with and that you can affect change on, and then leave. if you want to for a time, and then re-engage at another point. I think that's really clear that that you're saying things that can make a difference, and that if you're being clear from the organizational point of view about what your vision is and those multiple entry points, I think that's the really important way of engaging.
Excellent. Quick bullet points from the rest of the panel on SMEs and workforce. Liz?
I just agree with Sarah. I think that it's just believing that your voice is heard, actually. That's what I think it's all about.
I think Sarah's nailed it. Multiple entry points.
I'd say that it's also about just simplifying their access to major investments. So rather than it being lots of different paperwork, red tape to actually have to wade through, they can quite easily access one system where they can log in and say, right, this is how I want to be involved in your project. So that's really important as well.
And Keith, finally you.
Accessibility is exactly what it is, and as a county that's made up of lots of micro, small businesses, is important to us.
Many thanks indeed. Well, at this point, I'm going to draw our panel one on the business voice to an end. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. And as one comes off, group two come on. Now, this next panel, we're going to ask, what does the future landscape look like for economic growth? How can we build on the success of the local enterprise partnership model? And how will priorities and capital strategic direction, this is all about strategic direction, be developed? And on our panel here, we've got Adam Bryan, now in his Medway Council hat on. We've got Councillor Lee Scott from Essex County Council. We've got Abby Kemp from Canterbury Christchurch University. Joining her, we have Lisa McCants from Shared Intelligence, and Anna Christie from Sussex Chamber and LSIP. Is that everyone? And David Shepherd from Team East Sussex. So, everyone here present and correct to talk strategic direction. In which case, David, if I can ask you to take it away from here. Thank you.
Oh, that'll teach me to sit next to you.
Yes.
Yeah, strategy. I'm one of those business representatives, business voices. So I chair Team East Sussex, which has had quite a mention so far. The thing about Team East Sussex, coming from a business sector, was to make sure that we had guidance and a pathway to the future. And long before government said, you've got to have a strategy, we set ourselves the goal of putting one into place. And it was interesting about how we went about it, because that's one of the things that business people can bring to an organisation like Team East Sussex. You know, I've been involved with many strategies over my 40-year career, and so often they become just shelfware, bookends, gathering dust, not being referred to. And it was my absolute intent to have something that would act as a pathway for the future, something to follow with practical guidance and guidelines at the top level for everything else to fit into. So understanding that, we set about putting a strategy together. Perhaps most important was we had to sort of decide what sort of timescale we can talk about. And again, business influence here, I think, helped, because I think there was a temptation before we had our input to make it very short. Politicians, as I'm sure, will understand short timescales. But no, we want to look further. So we set out to 2050. Now, that might surprise many of you, but it's a number of interesting aspects about looking that far forward, most notably because it also coincides with the legal requirement for net zero. So we were looking ahead, and we wanted to get buy-in from all our stakeholders. It's no good having a strategy if everybody isn't sort of supporting it. And so we went out to get evidence, and we got a lot of actual evidence using a very competent firm of consultants. And one of the great recommendations was to put that evidence together alongside a whole range of consultation with many different groups. So we consulted with sector groups, we consulted with geographic groups around the district and boroughs within the county. But really interestingly, we went out to young people and to employees. I don't ever remember this happening in the strategy before. And of course, we got some really good inputs. So we've developed something just 34 pages long, which I feel is truly representative of the situation of the county as it stands at the moment, but also has implicit in it some really incisive and interesting aspects that came from those sector groups. I think how do we make sure it doesn't become shelfware is a really important part of this. And the way I'm going to do it as chair is I'm going to have one of these 34-page documents bound in red leather, just one, just for me. And it's going to sit in front of me every time I chair a meeting. And for each and every debate we have, I'm going to say, tell me, where is it? Where does it fit? The Bible. Now, I'm probably going to have to do it 1, 2, 3 times until everyone gets the hint, but to start with, that will be the way that we'll get to understand that all the decisions that we're making have to fit in with the strategy. And there's just one thing I'll say just to finish, because I could go on for a long time about strategy.
You won't.
is that perhaps the most important thing is not just the buy-in, but also that it is agile. Now, again, many of you in business have been involved with strategies that become shelfware. The whole idea of a great strategy is that you have the ability to change it as things change. And if we've got something that's going out to 2050, you can be guaranteed things are going to change technologically, politically, and it's going to influence what that strategy looks like. So the really important thing is that everybody who's input now will know that if they come with a proposal that actually doesn't fit, we don't necessarily reject it out of hand just because it's in my red book. It might be because we didn't get it right the first time, or that things have changed, we ought to change it. And that way I feel we have an active way of looking at a changing political and economic environment that we can make our strategy really relevant for.
Many thanks indeed, David. Adam, you're next.
Thanks, Jonathan. I thought long and hard about this, coming at it from a SELEP perspective and now a Medway Council perspective. And it'd be very easy to say a lot of nebulous stuff about writing strategy. I think at the end of the day, if you've got a clear vision, a set of deliverables, measures how you're going to get there, and a lot of people bought into it, I don't think it matters if you can fit it into your pocket or if it's 500 pages long, to be honest. The most important thing that I think I've found in my recent working experience, I suppose, you could probably summarise in 3 things. So 3 things I think are essential for making the strategy work, and I'll certainly bring this forward in my work from here on in. One, and I guess my perspective on it as well is you need at least 2 of these 3 things to make a strategy worthwhile. So the first one is around having equity and fairness. It's about having a structure in place for the partners that support the strategy and deliver the strategy that they're all comfortable with. Something that binds people together. So lots of good examples in how we managed to do that with SELEP. And I think for all the federated boards and everything else that we've discussed, that's really important moving forward, that people can engage with that in a way that they're happy with. If you haven't got that, I think there's a big problem. The second of the 3 things I think is around, and it probably sounds really crass to say it, but I think it's about funding. There's got to be a means to delivery at the end of the day. If there is no means to delivery, why are you doing it? Why are you wasting your time doing it? You can have a nice strategy as shelfware, I think David coined a few minutes ago. There's no point. If you're not shooting for anything, there's nothing you can deliver as a result of doing this, then that funding or whatever it is to sort of enable those deliverables is kind of really important. And the third thing, I use the word partnership, but I suppose it's more fundamental than that. This is about people skills. This is about giving people the respect they deserve. It's about being responsive to people. So in the role that I performed known as at the LEP, I've actually brought it into my role at Medway, I always felt that I should be responsive to people straight away. If I was emailed and somebody wanted an answer from me, I would give them an answer as quickly as I could do it, because that responsiveness is me showing them the respect that I think they deserve. And it's not just about respect, but it's about just recognising what everybody brings to the table. It's about having really meaningful kind of personal relationships with people, knowing how they tick, knowing how to sort of play a tactic in a meeting, and understanding how people kind of work together. So those 2 things are vital. I think for a strategy worth anything, you need to have 2 of those 3 things in place. So just you can take one of those out of the equation and kind of work on it and get there. But if you don't have at least a couple of those dimensions in place, then I think you're struggling. So for me, it kind of comes together in that.
So the meatloaf strategy, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Lee.
Under the banner of Everyone's Essex, and I'm sure everyone in the room, no offence meant to my colleagues, will recognise that Essex is the finest county in the United Kingdom. Under that banner, we've brought in North and South Essex councils, working together with our districts to actually deliver what the people really want, whether it be business, whether it be our residents. They want quality homes that they can live in. They want work that they can go to without having to necessarily come into London, because I'm sure, as everyone is aware, Essex is a county that runs from Frinton down to where I represent in Chigwell. So you've got from rural areas to what is ostensibly out of London. So it's tremendous differences. With the plans to build 2 new garden towns in both Harlow Gilston and indeed in Tender in Colchester, we need to not only create places for people to live, but jobs for them to do, and just as importantly, transportation to get them to those jobs. So it's a very, very wide remit. We also believe, under the DEVO agenda, to work together with Greater Essex, together with Thurrock, together with Southend, so that the whole of a Greater Essex can prosper. Now, we've heard about some of the difficulties because there isn't a money tree, there isn't a golden pot of money that we can all just plug into and use. So it's working with partnerships to try and create the extra resources to be able to do some of this work. For me, I've lived in the area virtually my whole life. I did spend some time up in Yorkshire, and I can only tell you they didn't understand a word I said most of the time I was there. But in all seriousness, we have to create a better future, listening to our businesses, listening to our residents, and giving hope to the younger generation for the future. I'll shut up.
That's great, Lee. Many thanks indeed. Hannah, please.
Thank you. So I know the question is all about the future landscape for economic growth, but I'm going to touch on more about the current and future skills that are needed to support that. So the Sussex Chamber of Commerce has all the business links and everything. It was one of the trailblazers and involved in the Local Skills Improvement Plan, the LSIP. And this was introduced by the Department for Education in terms of ensuring that there's 38 across the UK, but it's ensuring that through the employer representative bodies, whether it's chambers of commerce or whoever they are, that we bring that business voice, the education, the private sector, all the training providers together to really understand what the current skills gaps and needs are and what the future skills needs are, because that's how we're going to grow the economy, to make sure that we're addressing those gaps. So we worked very closely with SELEP to ensure that we had that data. And with that data, we then went out to businesses as well to start really understanding what their skills needs were. So we looked at all of the key sectors and the growth sectors as well across the whole area. And we developed a framework, a Future Skills Sussex improvement framework. And that will continue to look at things such as the data intelligence, having those conversations with all key stakeholders, making sure that we come up with innovative solutions to address those skills gaps. What's the offer going to be, and that talent, and how we address those gaps. And with that, we have to ensure that there's a continued joined up approach. Having these conversations, I'm on Team East Sussex, I'm on SELEP as well. It's making sure we bring all the key partners together so we carry on having that collaborative approach, so that we can really build on that profile, raise awareness of the key sectors in the area, but also address things that have already been addressed and mentioned by Adam in terms of looking at their diversity and equality, looking at sustainability and green skills for the future, looking at digital technology skills and how that impacts every sector, and making sure that we've got plans. Now, these priorities that we developed were then key in the next stage in terms of part of the LSIF, which is the Local Skills Improvement Fund, which the colleges then put in a bid based on the priorities we had set out. and now they're developing projects as a result of that. So without those future and current skills, it's very difficult, very challenging to really grow the economy. We need to make sure we're addressing those skills gaps.
Many thanks, Anna. If I invite Lisa to speak next, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I think one of the important aspects of setting the strategic direction obviously goes back to data and information. We've heard a little bit about it. We've touched on that so far. There are some clues, and I think they are just clues in terms of the government guidance that has been set out, not demands. I think that would be unhelpful. I think that basically allows there to be a little bit of flexibility in terms of how areas can look at their data in order to set that strategic direction. If you think about something like AI, the amount of information that is coming out, the amount of products and software that is being generated at the moment really provides some opportunities. So being able to look at things differently, whether that's on a different geographical scale or a different sector basis. But there's also pretty big challenges around AI. How do you make sure that diversity is considered? Who wrote the internet? Who's looking at what information comes through there and how it does or doesn't reflect the diversity of a place? But connecting those dots, I think business representation, obviously really important, being able to collaborate the qualitative and the quantitative side of data, again, to bring in that diversity point. I think in terms of that strategic direction, it's really trying to understand scale. So back to AI, there's a lot of really important and interesting techniques that can be applied to make sure that scale's looked at a different level. And I think with that, you can start to build up some of those partnerships and collaborations. And then just final thing I'd say on strategic direction, we have noticed through the government frameworks that there's a lot more being produced and put out there in terms of futures literacy. So understanding that there isn't one single future, there isn't one single path to economic regeneration, growth or inclusive growth, whichever language you prefer to use. Over the last 10 years, if you'd have thought about where we were and where we'd be now, may not have even thought about some of those challenges, some of those elements that need to be considered. So I think generating a lot more information through that futures literacy and being able to understand future landscapes and the benefits and risks will be really key for that direction.
Many thanks, Lisa. Abby, please.
Yeah, no, the funding and strategic landscape could be quite complex and difficult to navigate, and universities are very familiar in that setting, often operating at scale across various geographies. We work with numerous industries, often with populations which are quite diverse and dispersed. So, an example of that is European funding to address social and economic challenges. Universities can apply that strategic knowledge, government insight and networks to provide innovative solutions. They can use that invaluable insight to really look and help shape and inform the development of programs, and establishing clear communication channels with universities and local areas is vital for success. It really is, to ensure that they can leverage innovation funding and build that partnership working. It was interesting hearing the previous panel talk about being bid ready. Often funding comes down with very short notice, and universities can be part of that team, can be part of that top draw and proposal development. Just from a practical perspective, local areas working with universities, accessing sort of the academic expertise, facilities, student population, to build that partnership to then respond to future funding calls, and future strategic direction will be vital going forward.
Many thanks indeed to all our panellists. Now we're going to come to the audience. We've got more questions that we can shake our stick at. So if I could, I'll pose a question and we'll run through it very quickly and see how many we can answer in our 12 or 13 minutes or so. So first up, comes to the heart of it really. What do you think is the solution to funding the next generation of economic strategies? Local Growth Fund 2.0 or something else? Having done it all before, what's next? Or what would you like to see next? David?
Yeah, I think there's a temptation to concentrate too much on funding and money. And of course, has proven very successful with SELEP over all those years. But actually, there's a lot we can do in partnerships. And one of the important things about strategy is to identify the partnerships. When we were consulting, for instance, I mentioned about young people, about different sectors, but also the universities, so the education establishments. And I think all of us have got a need to keep a scan going constantly about how we can leverage those partnerships, those stakeholders, to identify ones that fits into your strategy, and secondly, how we might work together in order to achieve that. So a strategy doesn't give you anything on its own. It needs the partners, the stakeholders, to work under it to put together the implementation plan. And of course, if we were flush with money, that makes the job fairly easy. But actually working together to identify opportunities that still might pursue the strategy, I think is a really strong course of action.
Many thanks. Anna, you wanted to come in next.
Yeah, it's also bearing in mind that businesses don't work in just small areas. They do work, whether it's locally, nationally, globally. So it's looking at opportunities, how we promote our areas, but looking at opportunities from overseas, looking at that foreign direct investment. We are the second largest area for foreign direct investment. So we've got to look at what opportunities exist there as well, from overseas, from trade, and attracting businesses to do business with UK local businesses.
Yeah. Lee.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that because you're absolutely right. Encouraging foreign investment. Whereas I recently heard that in the Opal Coast in France, they were bringing in a lot of investment from other places in Europe. There is no reason why we all can't do the same. It's just a question of getting out there, working up the partnerships and working with people to bring that extra resources in, what we're going to need. Because, as I said earlier, there's no point in pretending that financially, whatever might happen in coming years, it's going to be easy to raise those finances. So I'd like to support fully what you're saying.
Adam, you wanted to.
I think there's a lot to be said for the track record and the track record of working together in a partnership like SELEP. I think when it comes to if there is any funding on the table, where in the country has got a good example of, where smaller areas have come together as a greater whole and pushed for things, on a bigger scale. I think, that SELEP's been successful in doing that. And I think if, being parochial about it, I think lessons learned from those processes and what we've been able to sort of prove in terms of delivery over the last 12 years, will stand us in great stead. I think some of the financial challenges that we're all facing in the public sector mean that co-creation and working closer together with our communities is important on the other end of the scale when it comes to smaller projects of no less importance, of major kind of local impact, and that's something that will colour our approach moving forward at Medway. I think one of the things that I was going to reflect on earlier, but in the interest of brevity, I kind of didn't. But I'll say it now. I think one of the real benefits that we've felt in this area over the last 12 years is SELEP being as big as it is has kind of given us this inbuilt competition. Mm-hmm. It's meant that when money's been on the table, inevitably there's been a sort of competition between different parts of the LEP to have the projects that have been funded. And as a result of that, obviously the projects that have been funded have been better, the business cases that have been developed have been better, and everything that sits behind that means that when there is elements of funding on the table moving forward, that everybody involved in those processes across the whole area is in a much better position than they otherwise would have been.
Many thanks indeed.
I'd just echo Adam's words in the sense of best practice and taking those learnings from previous funded programmes in terms of what's worked well, and really leveraging that public-private partnership to broaden that access to networks to be able to put forward those proposals that will ultimately achieve success.
Only to say, I think knowing your place, your partners and your priorities is really where you need to end up. So it doesn't then really matter what comes down the track. You've already got a plan of action for taking it forward.
Excellent. I've got a question from the chair for the Institute of Directors East of England. IOD members are finding it difficult to engage so many channels for engagement. What does the future hold for joined up strategy? We possibly to connect across the lines in the new sunlit uplands. David, yes, no, maybe?
Yeah, I think we in East Sussex would welcome involvement from as wide a church as possible. We have representatives from all the districts and boroughs. We have representatives from all the chambers of commerce. We have representatives from the FSB. So there's absolutely no reason why we can't engage with any other business organisation to widen our scope in terms of how we're getting our inputs, our information, our feeds from. So it's really, we said all the way through, business engagement is I see is fundamental, and we want to get as strong, incisive input from business as is possible, from wherever it may come from.
Any quick thoughts about how we join up better?
That co-creation, co-design comes from networks and relationships with local chambers, universities. All universities have business development functions, industry panels, which help organisations and help shape and inform curricula and future provision. So it is a two-way street, both parties need to be accessible.
Thank you. Adam, you.
Yeah, no, I think just reflecting on the comment that BIP would have left around the IOD and engagement. Certainly, we, from a KMET perspective, IOD are engaged. I think, kind of reflecting back on something I said a few minutes ago, it's having the right groups engaged and having as wide a church of inputs as you can possibly get is absolutely key to partnership. That's kind of goes without saying. What you need is something to galvanise that engagement and something to aim towards. And you had it at the beginning a couple of questions ago. When it came to funding or lack of, in the absence of any of that, there's got to be a way of being able to demonstrate a kind of route to getting funding from elsewhere, or actually kind of arriving at a kind of deliverable that you want to get to that everybody can buy into, even though there might be that challenge of needing to sort of fundraise down the line. So. I just think we're in a great position across the area to be able to sort of build on those partnerships that are in place. I just think, we're very aware of what the challenges are ahead of us, and just got to be honest about that. And just as I said at the beginning, make sure that word partnership is kind of deployed in every sense of the word. It's just about having proper engagement with people, listening to what everybody's got to bring to the table, and doing what we can to unlock those projects.
Great, got a few so many questions. I'll try and maybe it's one panelist for answer. AI, data analytics becoming more important for all sorts of innovation. Good, very pragmatic question. Who's going to now collect and manage the data that's important for the economic and social prosperity of the entire region to inform this strategic direction? Any answers? It's quite telling, isn't it?
No.
Does it need managed? Is the point of it not that it changes so frequently and so often that actually every time you look at a bit of data or how something's clustering or how something's changing, that you need to refresh and look at it? It doesn't have to be a really onerous task, but I think those conversations and those partnerships that perhaps look at all different things can add value to that.
Yeah, and on that, it's not so much the data and an amount of data, it's actually extracting the value from data, and various organisations, of course including universities, can help support organisations with extracting that value and being able to leverage some of the data sets to provide that, informed business decision making.
David?
I'd like to widen it up to sort of technology in general. Interestingly enough, have we got any Blade Runner fans here? Harrison Ford back in 1980 something. One of the great things about that film, looking back, is what did they predict 2020 would look like back in 1980? And there's sort of hover cars, and there are cell phones, but actually they missed it by a long way. And of course, there's been a remake, hasn't there, now with Ryan Gosling?
Yes.
And so they're doing it again from 2023. They're now looking forwards to see, well, what's technology going to look like in 2050? Well, that's interesting because I mentioned before our strategic plan goes out to 2050. So we're trying to do a Blade Runner 2 in our strategy. And of course, we're going to get it wrong. So a question like that is just so detailed, you can't really expect us here to get it right when the great brains of Hollywood are going to miss it by a mile. But it does go back to the point I meant about strategy. The important thing about strategy is you've got to be agile because you're not going to get it right. Wherever this data we think might be held and processed now, in 5 years' time, probably was completely wrong. We just don't see that yet. But if we're developing a strategy and we can recognize that's the extent of that change, we can change it and maneuver it to make best effect of what's happening from the outside world.
Many thanks. We're going to have to end this session very soon, but I have a genius question for each of the panelists in turn to give a word or a couple of word answer. Is there anything we should stop doing? It's good, wasn't it? Makes you think.
Being passive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's my two.
Anything else? Anything should stop? Lee, what should we stop?
Having meetings for the sake of having meetings.
Hooray.
Depending on government, because they seem to screw it up on every occasion.
Hurrah. Anything else we should stop before we stop?
Going into dark rooms. going off to plan and to debate needs to be done in an open forum, open space.
I think we should stop sort of shoehorning what we want to do into the shape of a sort of package somebody else sets. Stick to the guns. Stick to what we plan to do.
Excellent. Any more for anyone who final before we don't stop believing in tomorrow? Okay, well, let's put this to a stop now. But before we do, huge gratitude to our fantastic panel. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to invite my third and final set of panelists. Panel 3 are going to come up and they're going to discuss how we can think how we can think different about the delivery of economic growth programs that will revolve less around large-scale pots, so the end of all the fun of tournament financing. Find a seat anywhere, make yourself comfortable. And we'll have more emphasis on collaboration and co-investment. So how can we go on the delivery side doing things differently? My esteemed panel will include Joe Havers from the University of Brighton. I've got Corinne Day from New Haven Enterprise Zone. I've got Councillor Lauren Edwards from Medway Council, fantastic, along with Simon Cook from SELEP and Francis Moffat-Quado from the Thames Estuary Growth Board. Is everyone all here or hereabouts? Fantastic. So you've been through 2 panels already. You know what we're going to do. 2 to 3 minutes to speak on the theme of delivery, how we can think about doing things differently, relying less on the tournament funds and collaborating and co-investing more. So Joe, if I could ask you to take the plunge.
Thank you. I love the fact that I was asked to be on this panel because one of the things they said is how do you do more with less? And that's obviously something that universities have to deal with a lot at the moment. And we were asked to focus on very much about how we are creative in our approach and the evidence base that we need to take to make some of our decisions. And I think one of the key things as an anchor institution is that everyone expects us to be able to do everything and that we've got a magic money tree and we haven't. So I think one of the things for us is that we've really been focusing in on key priorities that can make a real impact and a difference across the region, relying on our evidence base that I think the LEP have actually been really good at helping to provide, but also our own academic evidence as well. And then reflecting that into our everyday operations. So just going back to the last question about what do we do to, what do we stop? We have to, the kind of line that I say is that it's 90% about what our strategic priorities are. And if there's a 10% added value to something that where it allows us to be creative, we can actually impact on that and actually really make a difference. And I think we begin to see a real difference about how we do that. And just to talk about some of the the key difference in funding. Over the last 3 years, we secured 30 million for SME engagement. On top of that, we also much funded the majority of that money as well. This year our allocation was £59,000 from the government. So when we talk about needing to do more with less, that's the kind of size of picture that we're needing to do. And we absolutely need to rely on co-creation and co-working and in-depth partnership with our partner, with new and existing partners in a way that we've not done before, very much more relying on framework agreements and saying we have to think past the short-term funding. We have to say what's our vision for the next 5-10 years and how are we going to work together.
Many thanks for getting us off to such a good start. Jo, Corinne, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks again for having us. Really pleased to be here. I'm going to tell a quick 2-minute story. I'm from New Haven Enterprise Zone, and I can only speak from my perspective of being the programme director. I think for us, really, it's very much around how money can actually be a distraction. I've been there 7 years. One of the things that I stepped into, and I've got some colleagues here today, was there was a void of voices, actually. It wasn't being heard, and there was also mistrust. And what we've done in the last 6-7 years is to create a shared view of our place in terms of New Haven itself, what we're about, what we want to be, and where we're heading to. And what that shared view has really created is an ongoing discourse with our partners. And you know, in the first place, that created a narrative, a view to put in for the funding. We now have 38 million plus funding for a town of 13,000. But again, that can make a lot of noise. So the discourse that we started when we put that shared view, that story together, has been ongoing. And I really don't like the word consultation because this is about marginal gains. We're trying and seeing things. We're testing things out. We've created lots of spaces as a town for conversation, to listen. And every time we listen, we go back and go, well, did we hear that right? And it's coming at us from lots of different directions. And I think the important thing here is, you mentioned the word kind of co-creation. It's what also happens in those spaces when you let it happen, that we don't look to the local authority in the entirety to take that responsibility. We're a bunch of partners in the town across businesses and community and others, and we all have a responsibility to champion our places. And that's very much what New Haven's story started and continues to be. And I think, yes, we have the benefit of some money, but investment comes in time and energy and belief and changing aspirations. So for me, and I would hope others in New Haven would say, we have that confidence in delivery with or without the money, because I think that it comes incrementally. It comes if you allow that organic growth, and it comes from having that shared view. And I've got 3 words I just wanted to share. Was shared view, technically that's 2 words, shared view, discourse. You know, the discourse is so important around that journey together. And the other one is adjusting. So for me, it's not linear. It's always going, let's keep going round, and eventually, I mean, arguably you could say you could just go around in circles, but I'd like to see the positive. We're going round, but we're progressing at the same time, because we're learning, we're trying, and we're delivering, whatever delivery means to you. But I think people in New Haven would say, we had a champions meeting this week. We had 60 people in the room, and everyone was like, there's still a ton of stuff to do. Look how far we've come so far. So
Many thanks, that's wonderful. Simon, please, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about different aspects of delivery so far, I guess, really. I suppose what I wanted to do was pick up on the importance of delivery, connecting back to partnership, although that's a word we've heard a lot this afternoon. I think there's an element where in our own experience, working with partnerships is as much about knowing what you're going to give up as opposed to what you're going to do, learning to sacrifice, learning to celebrate someone else's success and to pick other people up. I think we've set a benchmark for partnership across the wider SELEP, which is never that easy. So I think we can use that word really easy, but delivery doesn't happen unless you're prepared to sacrifice those things for the greater good. I think we all become, what we all realise is that we've become very busy all doing our own thing, but actually we have a right and a responsibility to start to elevate ourselves into a much broader systems leadership responsibility across our regions. If I'm honest, I think that's now even more important than it ever was in the past. There is a duty incumbent upon all of us, however we define our place, to step up and do what is right for our communities, whether that be people, residents, businesses, whoever. So I think being confident in that space and being confident to give up things for the greater good is also a key element of delivering success for me. In our own example in Kent and Medway, working with a range of different education providers, we realised very early on, if we all try and compete for the same pots, we're just going to spread that money and spread that impact really thin. Whereas if we all get behind different projects, eventually over time, we will all succeed, but at various points in time, one person might get something that another person's not going to get. And the impact on our communities and our businesses is more important than our individual interests sometimes in that. That's a really easy thing to say, that's really difficult for us, but I think if you're going to be successful around delivery, that's one of the guiding principles I think we have to have.
Many thanks, Simon. Lauren, please, let's hear from you.
So thank you. I think in terms of Medway, we have a challenge like a lot of local authorities, and they're not being particularly large pots of money, but having quite a large geographical area in which we needed to spread those funds. We have 5 distinct town centres, and they all have very distinct local needs and local communities. So we've had to really tailor our approach and work from the bottom up, really. So that, for instance, in Chatham, there's a really dynamic creative community, and that needs a different solution for regeneration than maybe other areas like Gillingham, where we've sort of focused on working with the local football club around town centre regeneration and restoring a sense of pride in the area. I think UK SPF has been a really useful vehicle for us, and using that in an intelligent way that is trying to help a lot of our community groups get to a more sustainable future, particularly in terms of future funding. So we've tried to use things like feasibility studies, sort of small pots of £5,000, and really have that bottom-up approach. So encourage applications from community groups and local businesses to sort of get proof of concept around a particular idea that then either, if it works, we in the next year's UK SPF allocation can provide some more money to sort of realise that aspiration, or it can be used by the group to go and get external funding from private providers, from organisations like the Heritage Lottery Fund. So that's the kind of approach that we've taken. And, you know, one example is we've got a High Street Heritage Action Zone in Chatham, where there's a lot of the creative community, but also a really rich heritage. And we've sort of allowed them to, given them some money so they can transition to a CIO, with the idea that then they're much better placed to get sort of more external funding and become much more financially sustainable and less reliant on us as a council. Because I think what's certainly key to my thinking is that councils can't do everything, and indeed they shouldn't do everything. But one of the key roles that we have as a local council is to bring people together, to facilitate those conversations. And certainly we don't want to be in Medway Council in the space where we are doing things to people or to communities. We want to be working with them, which is why on things like UK SPF, we've taken a very much a bottom-up approach and invited applications for relatively small pots of money, but with the idea that then everyone is, you know, working together, and particularly working together across sectors. So it's local authorities, it's the private sectors, but it's also the voluntary sector, which I think has an incredibly important role to play in regeneration and actually isn't talked about enough.
Many thanks, Lauren. It's wonderful. Thank you very much for that. Final panellists, Frances, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm actually going to talk slightly less about my role in the Thames Estuary Growth Board than my previous experience when I worked for the Department for Business and Trade, when I was posted overseas for 15 years and worked a lot with foreign direct investors, because I think, with, as been referenced, with the lack of funding, there's going to be more emphasis on looking overseas. So I think from that perspective, it's really important that you look at your offer in the context of what an investor might see when they're sitting overseas. And you might be really passionate about your local project, but actually they might just see the UK. So it's really, really important that you pull out your USP. What differentiates you from Manchester, for example? What is it that you can say? I think Roger mentioned earlier that I can remember a time when every region of the UK was saying to DBT, we're all world leaders in biotech. Okay, that clearly wasn't true. I mean, there may have been a few companies in each region, but if you compare to maybe what was going on in Cambridge, what should have happened to really draw in an investor was to say, we've got a world-leading university and company in our region who is partnered with Cambridge,
this could be a really strong attraction to an investor. And I think the other thing to think about is the days of, piling in a really, wealthy investor who wants a quick return on investment are gone. I think even for international investors, they're looking for a win-win, as are you, and they're looking for real partnerships that have length of time and depth. So I would quote a really strong example of when I was in the UAE. Mubadala, which is sort of a quasi-sovereign wealth fund set up to diversify their economy away from oil and gas. They always said their most powerful and most successful partnership when it came to investment was with Imperial College, because it was tackling an issue for them, which was on type 1 diabetes, so a huge genetic prevalence across the Middle East for type 1 diabetes. Imperial had given them their best people. Obviously, Imperial benefited from the financial investment, but that was a real win-win, and it's been a really long and successful partnership that's brought in academic institutions, but also businesses. The second thing I say, and it was referenced earlier, really talk to your own businesses, because many of them will be working globally. They can advise you on where they're seeing investors really interested in the UK. Many of them might be multipliers who are working. People like KPMG might be working with investors. If they're in your region, find out from them what markets you think you should be focused on, and then really work with your partners who can help you with that. Particularly the Department for Business and Trade, I would say that because I used to work for them. But actually, from an investor perspective, the last thing that we want as the UK is everyone and their dog knocking on the same doors and really getting on people's nerves. We need to bring a consolidated offer from the UK or from the region to those investors so that they can really grasp those opportunities and we can add real value to it going forward.
Many thanks indeed, Francis, and to all our panellists for addressing the question of delivery head-on. Question time. I've got two related ones on the subject of place. Do we truly understand the meaning of place? Is it a useful concept even? And secondly, if you could make one change to the speech mark system to enable the betterment of your place, what would it be? Is place a concept? And if it is, can we better it? Corinne, please.
I think it's been really interesting attending. I don't tend to get out much, actually. I tend to stay in New Haven quite a lot. But when I do, it's interesting seeing the kind of prominence of place rising up as a word over the last couple of years. And the thing for me that's really stuck with the difference between place and what was before in terms of regeneration is it's less project, more place. And I think that's particularly pertinent today when we're talking about strategies, pipelines, funding. We can get so focused on projects and pipelines that we forget about why we're doing them in the first place. So for me, place is synonymous with be less project.
Lauren, you had...
Thank you. I just wanted to raise the point around what we think about when we think about placemaking, which I think is a bit of an ugly term, to be honest, but I understand why people use it. We do tend to focus in regeneration, I think, on economic regeneration, which makes perfect sense. But I think the one of the reasons that it's in my job title, so I'm the cabinet member for economic and social regeneration, is that we have to remember that it's people at the heart of that. You can regenerate town centres, you have amazing new buildings, but if you have social problems outside of those buildings, an area is not going to feel like it's on the up and attract investment. And I think that's a really important point that sometimes gets a little bit lost, that we are talking about placemaking, but we're also talking about people.
Simon.
Yeah, I'm just going to add on to what Lauren's just said, and we've both got a vested interest because our place is Medway. And I think Lauren's absolutely right, is that we can rightly focus on the physical part of place, but actually the people that are in that place are the real powerhouse. And that means lots of different things to lots of different people, I think. But our duty in working with one another is really about lifting people's pride in their place, no matter where that is and what that is. And most of that might involve some really difficult conversations. Most of that might involve some quite transactional conversations where there's an assumption that we have all of the solutions to people's problems, but actually empowering people within a place might take a little bit longer, but by golly, is that rewarding when you see people really truly empowered to take pride over their place, whatever that might be. So I think the phraseology works for some people, but that's my part of.
Thank you, Simon. Joe.
I think place is quite an emotive word at the moment because I think it depends where you are in the country, what we think of place and what we think of place funding. And when place was first brought out, we think about, or you may not think about it, but it was very heavily in my world. Strengths and places was actually place, could be geographical, but it could also be sector. It could also be about what links you together, about what links the people. And I think actually one of the problems we've become is we've become very geographically focused. And if you're business and you're on a border, you might be completely snookered because you're on the wrong side of the administrative border. People, regeneration, social needs, cultural needs aren't dependent on place. They're dependent on what we do, what we put within the infrastructure and the support that we put within that, which has to be wider than just place-based activity. And I think so for me, I've got a slight tension on that. And I also have a tension because 50% of my place is the sea. So straight away we're in trouble. Another 30% is a national park. So when we start actually then thinking about what difference can you make within your place, you're actually left with about 20% of geographical area. And so for me, I do have a real problem. And I also have a hashtag beat the Midlands engine, just because of the sheer amount of funding that goes around. But I agree with a lot, the people element is the thing that's left out.
Francis, I have a direct question for you. You'll be pleased to hear. What geographical level do investors really engage with? Surely there needs to be a size and scale. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean some will say if it's a housing development, for example, they want a certain scale of it. But I think coming back to the question on place, people also look at place, and for the Thames Estuary. And for all of you, the proximity to London is a huge draw, and I think the amount of investors who want to buy the Ritz Hotel in London that I've met over the years is quite large, but obviously there's only one and they can't have it. So I think that's really important. Could you repeat the question for me again? I made myself laugh and forgot the question.
Is it a real thing? And what is the genuine size and scale? And how do you get things to come together? Which I think was what they're trying to answer.
It is definitely a thing for some investors. They'll have key ideas of what they want. So I think that's why it's also really important that you're very clear about what you want. So if it is an economic growth-based development, don't go and speak to someone who wants a housing-based development. If it's a partnership that's going to want R&D and businesses built into it, make sure it's someone who's got a track record of delivering that kind of investment. So yeah, it depends on what market you're going to, but most of the markets that we'll be targeting the Thames Estuary are developed markets with very experienced and sophisticated investors, and they'll be very, very clear about what they expect out of their investment.
Many thanks. Anyone want to jump into Francis' question before we move on? Okay, no. Okay, LEPs and local authorities have constantly had to bid into funds managed from Whitehall. How do we move towards truly devolved funds? That was the promise of the long-forgotten local industrial strategies. Any thoughts what this transition might look like in the next Parliament? Lauren, please.
Well, I have my hopes for what it might mean, and it does kind of follow that UK SGF model. I think that a lot of our productive capacity in this country, and certainly in local authorities, is spent chasing some relatively small amounts of money from central government. And I am hoping that whatever the next government is that we get a devolution approach which has some very clear funding metrics, very clear, very accountable, but simple metrics for local authorities like mine based on need, that then trusts local authorities to spend that money based on local need, because they are the people who live in their communities and understand what is needed. And I don't necessarily, by saying that, mean that I think that local authorities should then just go away and do what they think is right. It has to be that partnership approach where you are working with the colleges, the universities, the voluntary sector to make best use of that funds. But I think local government has to be trusted to do that and be held accountable to central government for how those funds are spent. but a very clear mechanism that just devolves funding and lets us get on with it instead of spending all of this time and money becoming professional bid writers, I think would be a huge boon for the economic growth and the productive capacity across the southeast and the entire country.
Many thanks. Joe.
I obviously, from a university, can't answer that from a local authority perspective, but I think I would answer it from an innovation ecosystem and a risk management point of view, that when we think about government funding and we think about infrastructure problems, and when there is a lack of that funding, we take a very risk approach to what we do, and we curl back into what we know, and it doesn't allow us to innovate, and it doesn't allow us to pivot, because we can't take that risk. And I think one of the things that we need to do is draw on different parts of the ecosystem where we can actually take that risk, and that would include how we better utilise funding streams, whether that's from UKRI, from other branches of the government, to look at how we work together to actually innovate our provision and our regional growth programmes, because I think it's very easy to get stuck on things that we know, capital buildings, where government loves the shiny new building, it loves that, but actually some of the things that we're really crying out for are revenue funding, and we actually really need to innovate some of those approaches, and we've got answers. And if we look back at what we've achieved over the last few years, we've got some really good best practice, we've got continual development. I continually develop my team and our approaches on looking at what we've achieved in the past and how we can build on that. So I do think there's questions about how we interlink and bring that innovation ecosystem to bear to really support the growth programmes.
Yeah, I'm going to give another example from Kent and Medway, and I think we might have heard Roger say this earlier on. I'll give Roger props for this, but Kent County Council established during the pandemic what was called the Employment Task Force, shared with Medway Council, which has galvanised partners around a table to bang their heads together around wider geographical challenges. But also what that's done is it's built relationships where people feel like they've got some skin in the game. And actually then what that has done is it's enabled us to work together to come up with solutions to some of the local challenges that exist. So that's not about anybody being more important than the relationship, but sometimes I think we underestimate our collective and individual ability around our convening power. Sometimes it is just as simple as convening, and if the local authority happens to be the convener, and that works well for a particular area, great. If it happens to be a university, a college, or someone else, or business, that's also great. And I think it allows those, it allows us to move beyond those initial conversations, which are mostly around, I haven't got enough money, you're not doing enough of that, and I wish you'd do more of that. Actually, once you get over those, you really get into solutions rather than just products, which I think is really, really helpful. And I think there's plenty of those examples. It's not rocket science, but sometimes the simple stuff can be the most effective.
Indeed so. Corinne.
I think this is answering the question, but it's certainly something I see at the moment. I think that Adam made a point earlier about equity, and I think in terms of where we've come from and where we're going, in terms of how we devolve monies and investment, it's considering the power around the table. And we've talked a lot today about business voice, we've talked a lot about community, and I've also worked overseas in a refugee context, and their power and participation was really important in terms of decision making. And I think going forwards, it's making sure we don't lose the integrity and quality of those voices that we're inviting to the table in how we devolve and take that responsibility serious in terms of how that's then invested. And certainly what we're seeing a little bit at the moment, I think it's fair to say, is a disconnect in what is being asked for and suggested and then what's being delivered. And sometimes pragmatically there's a very good reason why there's a disconnect, but it's about the communication. So for me, I think it's about not being complacent about, we listen to those voices, but we need to speak back as well and explain where we've got to, even if the delivery is disappointing or not where we want to be. Because I think in losing the LEPs, there's the equity thing I think is really important. I don't know if I've kind of articulated that very well, but I think that needs to be considered. It's not just about the money, It's about the integrity of what we're trying to deliver, and if we can't, say it, and then people
Thank you.
will be reasonable.
Okay, we're running down into the final sort of questions. I'll take, again, two themes. We've got sort of 3 minutes, so brief points on a very big, wide topic. And in terms of delivery, in the next Parliament, there won't be a bigger one than housing. So how can we collaborate across sectors to achieve our housing goals and meet the needs of our region's economic growth and social prosperity? And do we need a regional plan with job and housing targets supported by a delivery programme? If so, at what level? Huge, wide open questions, small amount of time, so do your best. Francis, thank you.
So I suppose on that point, one of the strengths of the Thames Estuary Growth Board is that with the estuary, and Kate Willard, our envoy, is quite flexible on where the estuary stops and extends to on occasions. But you've got a single point of contact, contact when it comes to investment propositions and someone for investors to focus on. And I think in the Harrington report, which did reference devolution, and the strength of devolution when it came to investment is having that single point of contact who can then, manage issues that a company might have when they're trying to invest in the UK, or can pass them on to the right set of experts in those specific areas, is really important.
Thank you.
A very tricky question.
Yes.
I think for me, certainly in Medway, the focus is around where we are building housing, making sure that we have the funds to provide the infrastructure that is needed to support those houses. I certainly don't want to build houses, I want to build communities, and I know that means building GP centres, it means having decent road networks, and I think that picture can get a little bit lost when we talk about national government targets for house buildings in certain areas. In terms of how we work together, I think certainly there are existing procedures in terms of things like we're currently going through our local plan process. So having to decide within our local authority borders where we place housing, where we put employment land. But there are very clear dependencies on other local authorities where, for instance, one of our neighbours might decide to go into their green belt to such an extent that then it makes the reasons that we would protect that green belt less significant because it's been eroded as a green space. So there's procedures there at the moment. Whether they are working and they're optimal, I think, is a separate point, and perhaps is a slightly bigger question for another time.
Keep it quick and concise, Simon.
Oh, crikey, really?
Go on, yeah,
I'm
rein it
looking
in.
at this through a skills lens, two things, and anybody in the audience that I offend by saying this, I'm more than happy to explain a bit further afterwards. Social housing, what is it? Something like 90% of our social housing will be needed still in 50 years' time. So we've got a huge amount of work to do around retrofit. That's not just the theory, that's the practice. How many organisations really understand what that means, what the cost is, and what the implications are? Thankfully, we're doing a lot. We're investing £3 million in Kent and Medway to make sure we've got retrofit skill development, not just the theory, but the actual practice. Second to that, through a skills lens, there's not a business in the country that doesn't say to me, we need more staff. Then 12 months later, we don't need more staff. We're now making a load of them redundant. The construction industry in the private sector needs reform. Otherwise, we'll never get a consistent supply chain. I'll never get enough good quality teachers to teach kids who aspire to go into those careers. And I think there's something about our construction industry and sector itself that needs to be reformed quite significantly if we're really going to deliver the growth we need.
Many thanks, Simon. Any final thoughts?
Just two things. We're on the coast, so the conversation about employment and housing in the same room needs to happen more often. There's too much of a disconnect. The second thing is more modular, more just considered way of how we build houses, speed to the market, cost, and so on and so forth. So just a different way of doing it.
And Joe, the final word with you.
I'm slightly worried about having the final word, but I can be very concise. I think the key thing for us is that actually we do need regional planning, and we need to be thinking about really up into the future. And of course, I wouldn't be finishing off without saying the University of Brighton has a construction life cycle centre, research centre, where we really are trying to look at the future. What does that mean? Where can we do? How can we work together? And other institutions have it. It's not just Brighton, but about how we work together to plan for the future, the skills, trying to find out from the the sector at the moment about what their long-term needs are, when they're in the here and now, is a real problem for us as skill providers for higher skills, and I know the FE colleges have the say, so I still think there's a massive bit of work to do there.
Many, many thanks to Joe and all our panellists. That's all, folks, for our three panels. Let's put it together for them. Thank you. And I'll pass on to Simon to take us through to who knows what.
Thanks, Jonathan. You're okay. I get the final word, so it's okay. Don't worry about it. Look, everybody, I think as we draw a close on today's session, for me personally, and I know I share this with many SELEP directors, a profound sense of real gratitude and pride. What we've done today, or what we've attempted to do today, is to embark on a journey of reflection, on dialogue, and a bit of forward thinking as well, exploring not only the successes of SELEP, the South East Local Enterprise Partnership, but also envisioning in some way, shape or form, the best we can with those crystal balls that we all hold, the region's economic prosperity as we plan ahead. First and foremost, I extend my heartfelt thanks to each and every one of our partners who have set what SELEP has been and what the future of the South East region will be. Its subgroups over the year have had tremendous impact, and I thank all of those who have dedicated their time into those subgroups. Your dedication, your expertise, and unwavering commitment have been the cornerstone of all of our success. Together we've navigated the challenges, and boy, there's been some challenges. We've seized opportunities. We've forged ahead with a shared vision of fostering growth and opportunity in the South East. I would also like to express my sincere appreciation to our speakers and panel contributors today. Your insights, your perspectives and thought-provoking discussions have enriched our session and also illuminated pathways for future collaboration. Your willingness to share your expertise and engage in constructive conversation embodies the spirit of partnership that really does define our LEP. A special word of gratitude to our host, Jonathan. Thank you very much for keeping us to order and, more importantly, to time, whose guidance and facilitation have ensured the smooth conduct of today's proceedings. Jonathan, thank you for your stewardship. It's been invaluable and we're grateful for your views and contribution. Last but certainly not least, I really want to acknowledge the tireless efforts of the SELEP staff and Essex County Council staff as the accountable body for providing invaluable support and expertise behind the scenes that have underpinned our partnership's success. Those staff that have been involved right from the very beginning and those staff that are still with us now as we start to change our activities and focus on a very different future. Your dedication, your professionalism, and also your passion for our shared goals have certainly not gone unnoticed, and I and the board extend our deepest appreciation to each and every member of the team. As we depart from this conference, let us carry forward the spirit of togetherness that has defined our collective efforts. We've laid the groundwork for a future where the South East continues to thrive as a hub of economic vitality and opportunity. Through this model, which places local places at the heart, let us all remain steadfast in our commitment to driving sustainable growth, fostering inclusive prosperity, and building a brighter future for all who call the South East their home. So in closing, I am filled with optimism and confidence as we embark on our next chapter, on the next journey that we are all embarking upon. With gratitude and determination, let us continue to work in partnership, inspired by the successes of the past and motivated by the possibilities of the future. Let's also show the UK just what partnership really is all about as well, shall we? And once again, thank you for all of you. Thank you for your unwavering support and dedication of SELEP. Together we are shaping a brighter future for the whole of the South East. Thank you very much and safe travels.